Hey, good evening. This is Spirit Journey. Today is Thursday, June 25, 2020, and the time is now 8:42 p.m. I'm going to show you a video. It's by CBS News, and it's entitled, 8 Corrections Officers of Color Say They Were Barred from Guarding Derek Chauvin. Derek Chauvin is the cop in Minneapolis who had choked using his knee Mr. Floyd, George Floyd, and it resulted in his death. So now he's in a detention center. And again, just a reminder about this particular officer, former officer Derek Chauvin. There were other police officers who were assisting him at the time of George Floyd's death/murder. 2 of them were people of color, and Chauvin and the other police officer were white. But look at this, that they have people who work in that correctional center or detention center of color, and this is what happened to them. I'm going to play it.
Suing Ramsey County for discrimination. An attorney representing the officers says they were prohibited from entering or working on the floor where former MPD officer Derek Chauvin was being held. The attorney spoke about the lawsuit against the county this morning.
Right now, our community, our state, and our country are grieving the senseless death of George Floyd and far too many other people of color. Many of us are using this moment to examine and take a closer look at racism and the small and large systemic injustices facing our neighbors of color. Unfortunately, we're here today to bring light to another example of prejudice and discrimination, this time in the workplace.
Wow.
On Friday, May 29th, 8 correctional officers of color went to work at Ramsey County Jail, which is right here behind me, expecting to do their jobs. However, they were prevented from doing so when former police officer Derek Chauvin arrived at the jail that afternoon. Upon his arrival, Superintendent Leiden ordered that all the correctional officers of color were to be prohibited from guarding Chauvin or going anywhere on the 5th floor where he was to be held. This decision was made solely because of the color of the officer's skin. We're here today because 8 individuals who were impacted by this decision were brave enough to come forward. It was not easy, and it still isn't easy. Out of fear of retaliation, they've made the difficult decision to remain anonymous today. They're fearful of losing their jobs and livelihood and putting their families at risk. My clients are kind, fiercely loyal, passionate people who care deeply about each other and about their job. And the deliberate discriminatory treatment they received from Ramsey County on May 29th has left them feeling broken. This morning, I'll share a brief overview of the events at Ramsey County Jail, and then I'll take questions from reporters. On May 29th, officers of color were busily preparing the jail for Chauvin's arrival when they were informed in various ways that they would be reassigned away from any task requiring them to be on the 5th floor of the jail where Chauvin was to be held. For example, 2 of the officers of color were tasked with cleaning the 5th floor to prepare for Chauvin's arrival, which involved removing urine and other unsanitary waste. When the cleaning was done, they were hastily reassigned away from the 5th floor once Chauvin arrived. One acting sergeant was stopped in the middle of booking Chauvin by the superintendent himself, who told the sergeant he did not want the sergeant transporting Chauvin to his unit. One acting sergeant was stopped, several correctional officers of color were interrupted in the middle of responding to an emergency call and informed that they would not be permitted to complete the emergency procedure because it involved taking the inmate to the 5th floor. Another officer realized something was wrong because he was in the control room and noticed on the jail's cameras that all of the correctional officers of color were on the 3rd floor. These officers initially thought the interruption to their schedules was odd, but later learned it was no coincidence. Superintendent Leiden had issued an order prohibiting all employees of color from working on the 5th floor. At least one officer of color was also reassigned away from the 5th floor for her weekend shift on May 31st. I want to note that this was not a split-second decision, as the sheriff's office seems to be saying at this point. Superintendent Leiden shared his idea of segregating officers with one of his sergeants prior to issuing it. The sergeant, a person of color herself, informed Leiden that his plan was offensive, but Leiden marched on and issued it anyway. And that lieutenant was not alone in objecting to the superintendent's order. The superintendent implemented his order and stuck by it despite receiving urgent complaints from several other employees, including many of my clients. In the face of these complaints, Leiden initially defended his decision, claimed it was backed by Sheriff Fletcher and other leadership, and justified it by saying that the officers of color were a liability around Chauvin. After some time, Superintendent Leiden finally backed down and claimed he had decided to change the order, but at that point the damage had been done. Shifts had already been reassigned, and the blatant discrimination had broken the trust in the bonds between the jail staff and the supervisors. Some officers of color were so upset they went home, concerned emotions would endanger their fellow officers and inmates. The employees affected by the order were hurt and upset that the jail leadership did not trust them because of their skin color. These employees are highly trained professionals whose job it is to keep each other safe, the inmates safe, and the jail safe. That trust is critical to maintaining safety in that dangerous and intense jail environment. In the words of one of the officers, he said, "As correctional officers, we work and live in an environment where we are vigilant and constantly protecting each other. The segregation that was brought to the facility that day has created a divide amongst the officers that work in the jail. We have accepted this job to be responsible, professional, and dependable officers. In this time of crisis, minority officers have not been given an equal opportunity to show these abilities. Superintendent Leiden's actions created lack of trust and respect for minority officers." Ramsey County's segregation order caused immediate and long-lasting damage. It has made going to work difficult for the affected employees. They're dealing with humiliation, emotional distress, and some of them have had to take time off or give up overtime shifts or promotions due to their distress. And now they're coming forward with their stories and they fear retaliation.
Okay. That was a mouthful. I'm just finding this video maybe 15 minutes ago, and I'm very, very hurt by it. It's disturbing on so many levels that the superintendent, after all this tragedy for George Floyd, that it shows where his heart is, or lack of his heart. And it's still showing a distrust for people of color, even amongst their own fellow officers. I'm sure that the officer, Derek Chauvin, I'm sure he's not the only person in Minnesota's history of killing a black man. But now, he feels his life, it sounds like, I can only speculate that he's complaining, Officer Chauvin, well, former Officer Derek Chauvin, feels frightened. And it just goes to show, when you have wicked people who don't like particular types of people, and then when it's turned around, the scenario, when you become an inmate, he knows what he was like, and so he's thinking everybody is like him. And so he's fearful. But because he's white, he's getting, again, special treatment and not have any person of color to even work on the floor. He's being detained. And that I find extremely, extremely offensive. You have those 3 other cops that were also arrested for the killing of George Floyd in their participation. They're not there in that correctional building. Where are they? Are they getting regular treatment? I mean, where they're staying, do they have people of color watching over them? So it's really exposing the systemic mistrust for black people, even if, not black people, people of color. It is a mistrust of anybody of color in that building. So it's just what's in their heart. It's just what's in their heart. The whole police system needs to be overhauled. It's creating a hostile working environment. Cops supposed to work together, right? You have all different races and people work in correctional facilities, all different types of people. But now you're going to protect a person who showed a disregard for human life. He had a disregard, but yet he's being catered to because he's white. And isn't that the whole problem? That you have some members of the white community, not all white people, but you have some white people who abuse their authorities over people of color. What about those people? What about those victims? What about their rights? Why they're so preoccupied to protect Derek Chauvin? People want to see a trial. People want to find out more about him. He's one of many police officers who abuse their position. It's pathetic. The whole system needs to be done over. I know, I just feel kind of lost for words right now. It's an evil system. So what's going to happen now? I'm sure other police officers are hearing about this. It's going to put mistrust amongst possibly all police officers throughout the country. Black, people of color against whites against people of color. How are you going to work in an environment like that when neither of anyone trusts each other? Wow. It's really, does someone just eat a stupid pill or what to do that? Not because being separated from working on the 5th floor, and they have no history of violence. Just imagine all those whites who possibly do things against black inmates because of the type of crime that they may have committed. So the fear this Derek Chauvin is feeling, probably just speculating, the fear he knew that he put upon people. See, this is karma. Karma that he's feeling. He's feeling his own fear of the things that he possibly done in the past. He doesn't deserve this type of courtesy or protection. But again, people have to do their jobs, and he has a right to a trial, and so no one should do any physical harm. No one. And who's to say that a white cop may not like him and putting a bad stain on everybody else and want to get rid of him? It's assuming just black people and not whites. Isn't this a crime? What happened to George Floyd? A violent crime. He was victimized and killed. I know. So that's all I'm going to really say right now. We all need to open our eyes. This whole system is really, really revealing human nature among law enforcement. If you don't trust one another, then you have a potential anarchy brewing on its way on all of its citizens in America. This is just food for thought. I'm really sorry to hear about this. It's an evil, and that superintendent should be removed from their position. Take care, guys. Be safe. We need a lot of prayer going on in this country. Bye-bye.